Less than a month before Marc Johnson died, he handed his closest friend an envelope. Inside was a 3-page list: his hopes, his dreams, everything he still wanted to do with his life. He was sober, he was healthy, he was, by every account, genuinely excited about the future. Nobody who saw him that day had any reason to believe it would be one of the last times. So what really happened to Marc Johnson? And why does his story deserve to be told? You may not have known his name before today, and that is completely understandable, because Marc Johnson did not live in the world of Hollywood premieres and magazine cover shoots and the kind of celebrity that announces itself loudly. He lived in a different world entirely, a world of concrete and wheels, and the particular kind of freedom that only exists when you are moving fast and thinking about nothing but the next moment. But here is what you need to understand about that world, and about the people who shaped it. In the 1990s and early 2000s, skateboarding was not simply a sport. For an entire generation of young people, boys and girls who felt like they did not quite fit anywhere else, it was a culture, a community, a language all its own. It lived on VHS tapes passed between friends, on grainy footage of tricks filmed in parking lots and stairwells, and the empty corners of cities that most people walked past without a second glance. Marc Johnson was one of the people who made that world extraordinary. Born on January 6, 1977, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, he grew up in a household shaped by difficulty, by poverty and instability, and the particular kind of childhood that teaches you either to shrink from the world or to find something, anything, that makes it feel worth inhabiting. He found a skateboard, and from that moment forward, everything that Marc Johnson was, the creativity, the precision, the restless artistic intelligence, poured itself into 4 wheels and a plank of wood, in ways that changed his sport forever. By the early 1990s, a teenage Marc Johnson had relocated to San Jose, California, the beating heart of a skateboarding scene that was producing some of the most creative and technically gifted street skaters in the world. He turned professional in 1994. He was 17 years old. What made Marc Johnson different was not simply his technical ability, though that was extraordinary. He could execute tricks with a smoothness and precision that made other professionals stop and watch. He had a style, unhurried, almost elegant, that seemed entirely at odds with the raw aggression that defined most street skating of that era. He made it look effortless. It never was. In 2000, he co-founded Enjoy Skateboards, a brand that would become one of the most beloved and recognizable names in the entire industry. Enjoy was different. It was playful and irreverent and full of personality, in a world that often took itself very seriously. It reflected exactly who Marc was, a person who understood that creativity and humor and genuine human warmth were not weaknesses. They were the whole point. Then came Fully Flared in 2007, a landmark skate video produced by Lakai Footwear. His video part in that film, obsessively crafted, technically breathtaking, emotionally resonant in ways that skate videos rarely manage to be, is still discussed today as one of the finest individual performances ever committed to film in the sport's history. That same year, Thrasher magazine named him Skater of the Year, the highest honor his sport can bestow. He was 30 years old. He was at the absolute summit of everything he had spent his life building. But here's the thing about summits. They are the loneliest places on earth. When you have spent your entire life climbing, when every ounce of energy and creativity and personal sacrifice has been directed toward a single peak, reaching it does not always bring the peace you imagined it would. Sometimes it brings a silence that is harder to live inside than the struggle ever was. For Marc Johnson, the years that followed his Skater of the Year recognition were not the triumphant continuation the world might have expected. Behind the public achievements, the video parts, the brand, the sponsorships, the signature shoe line with Lakai that bore his name, something was quietly unraveling. Alcohol had entered his life the way it enters many lives. Gradually, quietly, then all at once. He had spoken about it publicly over the years, with the kind of disarming honesty that made people who struggled with similar things feel less alone. He did not dress it up or explain it away. He acknowledged that the pressures of professional skateboarding, the constant demand to perform, to innovate, to be the most creative person in every room, year after year after year, had worn something down inside him that he did not know how to repair. The drinking strained relationships. It complicated his career. It created distance between him and the people who cared about him most. And for a man whose entire identity had been built on connection, on the belief that skateboarding was fundamentally about community, about elevating the people around you, that isolation was perhaps the most painful consequence of all. Louis Barletta, his closest friend and one of the most respected figures in skateboarding, would later write with extraordinary tenderness about watching Marc's career fall apart during this period. Barletta had been there from the beginning, had met Marc when he was 17 years old, fresh and hungry and full of possibility. He had watched him achieve everything, and then he had watched the weight of everything become too much to carry. Those who knew Marc during this time described a man who was never cruel, never unkind, never anything other than deeply, painfully human. His struggles were not a character flaw. They were the consequences of a life lived at an intensity that the human body and spirit are not always built to sustain indefinitely. The skateboarding world watched, and waited, and quietly hoped. Because everyone who had ever seen Marc Johnson push a skateboard down a street knew that what he carried inside him, the artistry, the vision, the profound and genuine love for his craft, was worth fighting for. They just did not know how long the fight would take. What most people didn't know was that in 2009, Marc Johnson made a decision that required more courage than any trick he had ever attempted on a skateboard. He quit drinking, he began therapy, he started doing the quiet, unglamorous, deeply difficult work of rebuilding himself from the inside out. It was not a dramatic public announcement. There was no press release, no carefully managed media narrative, no redemption arc served up for public consumption. It was simply a man, alone with the weight of his own life, deciding that he was not finished yet. What most people didn't know was that the years that followed his decision to seek sobriety were some of the most creatively rich of his life. He turned toward painting, toward woodwork, toward the kinds of artistic expression that did not require a crowd or a camera or the approval of an industry. He made things with his hands, because making things had always been how he understood himself most clearly. He launched the Back 40, a creative project built with fellow skaters Kenny Anderson and Chris Roberts. He described it not as a company, but as a platform, a space for ideas that did not belong anywhere else. This was Marc Johnson at his most essential, a person who could not stop creating even when the world was not paying attention. What most people didn't know was that the financial rewards of a long professional career had never been his primary motivation. Estimates placed his net worth in the range of $1 to $2 million, substantial, but modest by the standards of athletes with his level of cultural influence. He had lived at various points in a semi-isolated mountainous area of California called Crestline, away from the industry, away from the noise, close to himself. What most people didn't know was how deeply he cared about the people around him. Louis Barletta described Marc as someone who opened doors for others, who gave opportunities to skaters who might never have had a chance otherwise, who took a young Barletta to Times Square on a shopping spree because he noticed the kid needed gear, and simply took care of it, without fanfare, without expectation. He had, as Barletta put it, the golden touch. Whether it was on a skateboard, building a brand, or developing a creative campaign, everything Marc touched carried his particular fingerprint. A combination of precision and warmth, and a refusal to be ordinary that was entirely his own. What most people didn't know was that in his final months, Marc appeared to be genuinely turning a corner. He had spoken in past interviews about the long road of recovery, about learning to sit with himself, about rediscovering why he had fallen in love with skateboarding in the first place, not for the applause, or the sponsorships, or the industry recognition, but for the pure physical joy of moving through the world in a way that felt like freedom. When he visited San Jose in April of 2026, less than a month before his death, the man Louis Barletta saw was sober, healthy, alive with excitement about what was still ahead. They spent days together exploring old neighborhoods, revisiting the streets where so much of Marc's story had begun. He extended his trip because he did not want to leave. He handed Barletta an envelope before he went. Inside was a 3-page list, everything he still wanted to do, every dream he had not yet chased. He was 49 years old. He believed he had time. The news reached the skateboarding world through Thrasher magazine on May 26, 2026. Not through a formal press release or an official statement from a publicist. Through Louis Barletta's tribute, raw and personal, and written from a place of grief so deep, it read less like a public statement and more like a private letter accidentally shared with the world. Barletta wrote that the reality had not yet fully settled in, that he had met Marc when he was 17, that he had watched him achieve every skateboarding dream he had ever held, that he had sat beside him at the premiere of Away Days, and then later watched his career fall apart in ways he could not stop and could not explain. He wrote that Marc was a genius and a tortured soul. He wrote that he did not understand why his friend was gone at 49 years old. And then he wrote the line that stopped everyone who read it. He said Marc had told him, during that final visit, that he wanted to be remembered for his skateboarding, not for his failures or his shortcomings, for the thing he had given everything to, for the art that was his most honest self. The response from the community was immediate and overwhelming. Steve Caballero, a skateboarding legend whose own career stretched back to the 1980s, a man who had seen every era of the sport come and go, wrote simply that Marc was loved, that he wished this could have been avoided, that he was praying for Marc's close friends and family. The official cause of death had not been publicly confirmed at the time of this video. No formal statement had been released by his family or representatives. The circumstances surrounding his passing remained private, as his loved ones asked the world to give them space to grieve before giving them answers. What the community did not wait for was permission to remember him. Across social media, across skateboarding platforms and forums, and the corners of the internet that have always belonged to the people who loved this sport most deeply, fans went back to the footage. They watched Fully Flared again. They rewatched his Enjoy parts. They shared the specific moments that had first made them understand what made Marc Johnson different from everyone else. That particular combination of technical mastery and artistic soul that only comes along once in a generation. Some of the people posting were in their 50s now. They had been teenagers in the late 1990s when they first saw Marc skate on a tape someone had copied and passed around at school. They had grown up, moved away, built lives entirely removed from skateboarding. And yet something in them still recognized the loss, still felt it personally. Because Marc Johnson had always been about more than tricks. He had been about the belief, radical and stubborn and utterly sincere, that what you do with your creativity matters. That art made in obscurity, for no audience but yourself, is not wasted. That the people you lift up along the way are the most important measure of a life. Those teenagers who watched his footage in 1999 are in their 40s now. Some of them are parents, some of them are grandparents, and every single one of them remembers the first time they saw him skate. That is not nothing. That is a legacy. What does Marc Johnson leave behind? He leaves Fully Flared, a video part that skateboarding professionals still reference as a benchmark, not just of technical ability, but of what it looks like when someone pours their entire creative identity into a single performance. When a piece of filmed footage becomes art rather than documentation. He leaves Enjoy Skateboards, a brand that he helped build into something genuinely beloved, playful and human and full of the kind of warmth that his sport did not always prioritize. Enjoy was Marc's personality made tangible. It still exists. It still carries his spirit in its DNA. He leaves Thrasher's Skater of the Year award of 2007, a recognition that says, in the clearest possible language, that his peers, the people who understood most precisely what excellence in this sport requires, looked at what he had made and said, this is the best of us. He leaves Louis Barletta, who turned a young man from San Jose into one of the sport's most beloved figures not because he had to, but because that was simply who Marc was, someone who saw talent in others and felt compelled to do something about it. Someone who took people to Times Square and bought them what they needed, because it never occurred to him not to. He leaves the 3-page list that Barletta is now carrying for him. All those hopes, all those dreams, written in Marc's handwriting, in an envelope handed over on a sunny day in San Jose between two old friends who had known each other since they were barely grown. That list now belongs to everyone who loved him, a document of possibility from a man who was not finished. And he leaves a question that sits quietly at the center of every tribute, every memory, every piece of footage people have gone back to watch this week. The question of what more he might have made, if only he had been given more time. The answer to that question will never come. But the work he already made, the video parts that nobody can recreate, as Barletta put it, those are permanent. Those belong to everyone who ever watched them and felt something shift inside them. Everyone who saw a young man from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, glide across concrete with impossible grace and thought, I did not know it was possible to be that free. He was a genius and a tortured soul. Those two things were never in contradiction. They were the same thing, expressed in different directions. Marc Johnson was 49 years old. He deserved more time. He also struggled, deeply and honestly, and in ways he never tried to hide from the people who knew him. He fell. He got back up. He was, less than a month before he died, writing down his dreams on 3 pages of paper and handing them to his closest friend with the hope of a man who had not given up. That is not a tragic story. That is a human one. Hold the people you love close. Tell them what you hope for. Write it down if you have to. You never know which visit will be the last one. If Marc Johnson's story moved you today, if it reminded you of someone in your own life who fought hard and loved deeply and deserved more time, please leave a comment below. Share a memory if you have one. This is how we keep people alive after they are gone. And if this tribute felt like the kind of storytelling you want more of, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Because the stories that truly matter, the ones about real lives, real struggles, and real legacies, those are exactly why we are here.